All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tusknot channel. Today, we're traveling back to the 17th century. One of the most interesting and perhaps little known chapters in New England history is the story of the Scots prisoners of war and their indenturement. And here to talk to us about that is John D. Demas of the Old Berwick Historical Society at South Berwick, Maine. Hello, John.
How you doing, Ray?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, this is great. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so I know so two battles took place, correct, in 1650 and 1651, respectively.
Yes, and so I was just going to go over briefly the English Civil War very
Okay,
quickly. I've just got some notes
sure.
and then talk about the Battle of Dunbar and the Battle of Worcester, which were important to what the project we've been doing up here.
Okay.
So 1637, King Charles I was King of England. His father had been James VI of Scotland, who became James I. And he died in, I think, 1625, and Charles took over, his son. And he was attempting to impose Anglican services on the Scots, who were Presbyterians. And the
Okay.
Scots didn't like that. So they became known, they swore a covenant to uphold the Presbyterian Church. So they're referred to, the Scots, as the Covenanters.
All right.
And then a war broke out in 1639, the Bishops' War, which was in Scotland. And that led to the first English Civil War. And there were three English Civil Wars, also known as the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, because Charles was trying to unite kingdoms of Ireland, Scotland, and England.
All right.
And essentially, some of the key points here was 1647. There had been a war broken out between the parliaments, and they're known as the parliamentarians, against Charles I. There was suspicions, I believe, that Charles had married, I think Charles had married a French queen, and there was some suspicion, but there became the war broke out really between the Parliament and King Charles I. And the Scots were on the side of Parliament at first, because I think there were suspicions among the parliamentarians, who were a lot of Puritans too. They didn't like the Anglican Church as much, and which is one of the reasons I think a lot of the Puritans fled to the U.S.
Certainly.
US. So by 1647, in the first English Civil War, Charles had done very badly in the war, and he was in the custody of the New Model Army, which was now being led by Oliver Cromwell, because he'd been an outstanding general, and he'd created this New Model Army, this kick-ass English army, and did all kinds of horrible things. There's a great quote from when he was in Ireland that, and he was on the Burren. One of his soldiers said it was a terrible place because there was no water to drown a man in, a tree to hang him from, and too stony to bury a body in. I mean, sort of sums up how the brutality of Cromwell. So by December of 1647, the Scots had changed sides, and shortly afterwards, I'm sorry, by 1649, Charles was on trial in England. His death warrant was signed on January 27th, and on January 30th, he was beheaded. So boom, he's out. Cromwell, the Parliament takes him out.
All right.
That's when the Scots switched sides, because they'd taken out a Scottish king, essentially, the parliamentarians.
Okay.
And they went about supporting Charles II, the son of Charles, as the proper monarch. Charles ends up in Scotland. He signs a covenant with the Scottish, and the Scottish go to war with the English. And by 1650, which comes up to our Battle of Dunbar time, in June of 1650, the Cromwell had taken an army up through Dunbar on the east coast of northern England and Scotland on the border to approach Edinburgh. The Scots had raised a large army under General Leslie, and they successfully defended Edinburgh and sort of chased Cromwell's army back to Dunbar, where they were pretty much trapped, and they weren't in great shape at that point. And according to various sources, the Scots outnumbered, when the Scottish army came to Dunbar, they had the high ground, they outnumbered Cromwell significantly. And Cromwell really thought he was in trouble, but the weather was terrible. The Scots came off the high ground, and Cromwell launched a surprise attack in the morning and threw his cavalry against the Scottish cavalry and managed to rout that cavalry, and they escaped pretty much intact, the cavalry. But they surrounded the foot soldiers, who are some of the people we'll be talking about here too.
Okay.
And it was a disaster. Within an hour, 2,000 to 3,000 of the Scottish soldiers were dead. They let go about 4,000 of the injured and the older soldiers, and then they started marching 4,000, about 4,000. And these numbers are kind of all over the place, so that, you know, these are not hard and fast numbers. We're talking about 375 years ago. So,
right.
But it's believed about 4,000 marched south, 1,000 died on the 150-mile trek. They were being marched south by the parliamentarians, by Cromwell. And 1,000 die on the way. About 3,000 come into Durham Cathedral, which has been cleared out because of Henry VIII had overturned the Catholic Church in England. The cathedral was empty, and they put all these fellas in there. And by the end of October, this is September, the battle's over. Within a few weeks, they're in Durham, and by the end of October, half of those are dead already.
My goodness.
Yeah, just appalling.
Just penned in there, like, and that's and pestilence took over.
They were sanitary conditions were terrible, a lot of disease, people just dropping dead. I'm not sure what they were dropping dead from exactly.
Yeah,
they were being fed apparently, but so the English realized they have a problem on their hands. They don't want to release these young men. They didn't do that before because they don't want them to join back into the army. So they decide to start shipping them overseas. But there's so much sickness. They come up with about 150 that are sent to Boston. And they leave for Boston on about November 1st. So, you know, this is happening very, very rapidly. And they come on a ship called the Unity. And they've been sent, I love this, by the Company of Undertakers in England.
Right, I like that too.
And this is before the day that undertaker meant like a funeral director. This is just undertaking a project, a big project.
A contractor or something. Right.
So 150 come into Boston. They come in mid-December of 1650 on the Unity. And again, these numbers are a little shaky. So I've got 62 go to work in ironwork operations. Another 36 go to the Saugus Ironworks specifically in Saugus, Massachusetts.
National Park, correct?
Excuse me?
The National Park now.
Yes. Oh, it's a marvelous national park.
Okay.
So
yeah.
If you go there,
yes,
it's a working operation. It was rebuilt. It was actually built by U.S. Steel back in the 50s and 60s. So it's really incredible.
Yeah.
Recreation. And that's the only list. We have a solid list of those 36 that were Saugus Ironworks. It definitely came from the Battle of Dunbar. The rest, the original ship catalog has been lost, which that would be wonderful to find. But 9 went to other operations and local farmers and the Braintree Forge. And then this fellow, Richard Leader, who was one of the folks that was running the Saugus Ironworks, came up to Maine with it's thought 15 Scottish prisoners he had it was supposed to be a 12 sawmill on the Great Works River.
Okay,
Why it's called the Great Works.
right.
There's some question about whether there were that many saws. And then another 15 were sent to New Hampshire and Maine, other Maine sawmills. So those are the folks with the Dunbar that I've been working on. I've been working on a map, which I have the map behind me, and I apologize to folks. I can't show you. We could do a screen share at some point here. Maybe I could put it up, but you have kindly, you're going to show a little piece of it.
Sure. Yep. It'll be on our video here, and I'll also try to provide some blow-ups on the channel somehow or another, John, if I can.
Cool. Thank you.
We'll try for that.
So again, there were a lot of Scottish prisoners from the two battles that ended up here in New England, and a lot are still not accounted for. I've been relying a lot on a website called the Scottish Prisoners of War Society.
Yes.
People can just Google that. You can find out all about the Battle of Dunbar, the Battle of Worcester, and about lists of all these people and all the information that's known about them. And I relied on very much for this information. So on my map, I tracked about 49. I've got 49 Dunbar prisoners on the map. I've showed the sawmills where they were working at when in their indentured.
Okay.
And they came essentially as prisoners of war with a 6-7 year indenture. And once they were released, they got grants of land in New Hampshire and Maine.
Did they really? Okay.
Yes. And because again, I love it. My first wife is from Maine, and she always talked about being up Maine, and they were always land poor, which means they had a lot of land, but they didn't have any money, particularly to do anything with it.
Yeah.
So there was a plethora of land down here. And they gave the Scots often, it looks like they stuck them out in the outskirts of town. It was a lot more dangerous in about 1656. The Native American Wars broke out about 1676 down here. So these poor fellows had gone through the Battle of Dunbar, gone through the imprisonment, the cathedral, transportation to the New World, and working in the timber industry here, one of the most dangerous industries.
Oh.
And then they end up in another battle zone for a large part of the rest of their life.
Yes. The King Philip's War era.
King Philip's War, 1675, and then leading up to like the late, when did the last French and Indian Wars were probably
53.
The early 1700s, I think. So,
okay.
But so that the Dunbar prisoners, and there was Battle of Worcester, which was in 1651 to the day, September 3rd, 1651.
Incredible.
Cromwell, King Charles II had taken command of the Scottish army, and he decides on a bold move to go invade and go to London to take out the parliamentarians. Which, because Cromwell had this really crack army too, and a lot of the Scots army were inexperienced, young people, very young, and this time, although Cromwell was supposed to be outnumbered before, this time Cromwell had about maybe 28,000 troops to Charles's 16,000 troops. Charles had come south expecting he would pick up like sympathizers on the way, and they never materialized, or they were intercepted beforehand. So he ends up in the town of city of Worcester. And this is a much more dramatic battle. The one in Dunbar was over in like 1 hour. This lasted quite a bit longer, but again resulted in the defeat of the Scots very badly. And what happened after Worcester was they captured, how many? 10,000 were captured in this battle, and marched down to London, or transported to London. And very shortly, about 272 were sent on a ship called the John and Sarah, which came into New England.
Okay.
And so those are the Worcester POWs that I've been working with. And many went to Massachusetts, of all these, Dunbar and Worcester. Uh, there are more in Massachusetts than in Maine and New Hampshire for a lot of these. But a lot of the Worcester too, folks, that hasn't been well documented. On the prisoners of war site, it's known 272 came in, and we have the names of those people on the ship, but they haven't all been tracked down really. So what I have been able to work with was about 49 Dunbar prisoners who ended up in Maine and New Hampshire, and 17, only 17 from Worcester Battle.
Okay.
Now on a map, I took this old map, this wonderful map that's in the British Museum, in the British Library.
Right.
It was created in 1665-ish by a fellow, it's believed, John Scott, who was an adventurer, mariner, and a map maker, one of the best map makers at the time. And he lived in Long Island.
Okay.
So he was close enough by to come up and clearly visit this area. And he created a map that is, the more I've worked with this map, I decided, someone advised Wendy Persig, who used to run the old Berwick Historical Society, I wanted to put these guys all on a map. And she suggested I use this map. So
Okay.
taken this and I've laid on top of it the sawmill sites and all the Scottish prisoners' home stalls or home sites, and they moved sometimes.
Right.
So indicated on the map the date, where they were, their name, and then indicated whether they moved somewhere else and stuff. So I've compiled all this information. I spent several years obsessively on this project.
And this is all post-indenturement, right? When you're saying they live somewhere, you're meaning after their indenturement, most of them lived through that, in other words, did they?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And so I'm looking at where the sawmills were and trying to figure out who was in what sawmill and where they lived. And for example, there was a fellow, Valentine Hill, that was his name. And he had a sawmill. He was an Englishman, ran it in Durham, which is then known as Oyster River at the time.
I've heard that term. Yep.
And Valentine Hill had several of the Scots, and he ended up selling or giving land to some of the Scots when they were freed, and some settled right around there, and then later moved various places. Like, for example, there's two guys, Brown and Orr, and I'm convinced these are my gay Scotsmen, I think, because they never married, and and they left everything to each other. And they moved to Kittery, and then they moved up to Kennebunk, and ended up moving back to Salem eventually, some of these folks, after some of the warfare up here.
Okay.
Now, I've been working, what I did, I spent several years, I've been tracking down all the original information I could possibly do, and secondary information from very trusted historical sources like this fellow Stackpole or Banks, and people who've drawn maps. But this is an example. I went to the Kittery Town Hall.
Wow.
And found this beautiful old document that of the original of George Gray's homestall, his 60 acres that he was given.
Okay.
In what was then Kittery. Berwick was part of Kittery at the time.
All right.
Actually, it was the upper parish of Kittery.
I saw that on the map. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting is Berwick one historian thinks that the Protestants, the Puritans in Massachusetts who coveted what the Cavaliers up here had a great timber and fishing industry, and they ended up taking over Maine eventually. So the Puritans in Massachusetts, and they may have foisted the name Berwick on the English up here to punish them. And but then there's the parish of Unity, which was up here, which is named after the ship, perhaps, so you had a
Right.
group of Scotsmen, but they had an outsized influence in this area. It's really
I see.
remarkable. And
So,
they became
they're not, they of course would be Presbyterians. Whether or not they had a church to attend, we don't know that, but they certainly were not of the same faith as the Puritans, is your point, correct?
Yes, and that's
Okay.
the interesting thing too here. One of my great sources is these Maine and Province in Court, which there's a six volume set that are great reading because the Puritans were busy fining people for not going to church, so they were forcing them to go to the parish churches,
Right.
and they were fining them for fornication and having children out of wedlock. That's most of them, are those two categories. Okay. What's really interesting is that sometimes they seem to be fining a couple for having sex who are married. And I don't know if this is the wrong day of the week or is it, wrong.
This is the guy, if I could, is this not the guy that was married in Scotland and he couldn't, and he just was here, and I think he said, what else do you want me to do? He married someone else, or he thought he did, or something. I think this is the guy.
There's several, all these guys came over and they could not get back to Scotland.
Were he not married, I think they wouldn't have bothered him so much about that he was with another woman. I think it was that he was married already was their point, but at any rate, that's
James Grant.
Okay, yes.
Scotsman, who was here with his brother Peter Grant, and they seem to live together in what is in present day South Berwick.
Okay.
And James the Scotsman disappears, dies. It's not really clear. And Peter ends up marrying or living with his brother James' wife, and he gets into big trouble for that. Yeah,
this is the one I'm thinking of. Yes. Okay, John.
And so that's the case, but the court records are great. There's a wonderful example too that of several of the Scots getting in trouble with the constables and what they're in court, and it's registered that they said a constable must have come up to them and said, "What be ye up to, Scotsmen?" And they went, "The divil a bet." And it took me a year and a half to figure out what the hell the divil a bet meant. And I found a modern Irish expression, and I've got an Irish brother-in-law too that's the devil a bit. And what it means literally is nothing.
Okay.
So what are you up to, Scotsman? Nothing. The devil a bit.
Okay.
But they end up in court because of that too, which is really funny. So, and there's no follow-up on that. So clearly they may have figured out eventually that it was really meant nothing. So
they blasphemed back to him, and that was a charge. I see. Okay.
Yeah. So he thought they were swearing at him,
right?
And they were just saying it was a Scottish expression of
a very small amount, the devil of a small amount, or something like that.
Well, we're up to nothing.
Yeah,
do a bit. Apparently, what it means. So anyway, I've been trying to look for original records. Here's town records from York. They're now online. A fellow, James Kensis, who's the Yorktown historian, worked with the town to get their old town records online, and they're beautiful and
very nice,
very easy to read.
Very important work.
So
should more of it should be done.
And then I took this is from the 1674, they drew maps. Massachusetts got folks to draw maps of the towns. This is from an excerpt from the York map. And what I overlaid on that was there's a certain amount of information there, but I sort of laid in where I thought the prisoners' home sites were. And this is Mickham McIntyre, who you've heard of
Yes.
too. And the McIntyre garrison is still over there.
Okay.
And then I've got satellite photography.
My goodness.
And if you look here, there were several Scots where I was searching, trying to pin down, looking at all the records I could to figure out where they were, looking at the old York Book of Deeds,
Right.
and town records, and pinning down exactly where they were. And here this was interesting because this is right now, and here's an area where 4 of the Scots had their homesteads.
I see.
And it's unspoiled right now. So this is a place we can go look at archaeologically.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So we've been working with a Tad Baker. Emerson Baker is a doctor at the Salem State University in Massachusetts, who's written a lot of wonderful books. He wrote a book about witchcraft in Salem. He's written a lot of wonderful historical books that are really terrific. And he's a great ally of ours. And he has put together a project with Durham University in England, where they found the bodies of a lot of the Scots prisoners in 2013 from the cathedral that had died in the cathedral. His university, Salem State University, the University of New Hampshire, Saugus Ironworks, which is the National Park Service, and the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, and little old Berwick Historical Society. And they have been using my map, which is cool. And I've got my map refined to a point where I think it's
For you. Good for you.
And what's interesting about the map is you can see like what happens with so many immigrant populations like the Italians or the Jews or other groups that come into the country, and they tend to coalesce the first few generations into ghettos often.
Okay.
Because the Scots came here and they were Gaelic speakers and they spoke Scottish too, but that was close to English, but they weren't really accepted here by the English population.
Sure.
Considered low on the totem pole. And I think they were very friendly with some of the local fishermen too. And they tended to congregate. And here's the Piscataqua. This is the Berwick area. This is York. This is Kittery. And this is New Hampshire. And this has got Dover, Durham, and Exeter.
Okay.
And when I pulled this all together, it's really wonderful. It's thrown like initially sort of all the Scots that were in York just over into the York side. And then when I started pinning down, they all pulled up into a real area that's still known as Scotland.
Is it really?
Yeah. And then in the Berwicks again too, and this is present day Berwick, and you find them all clustered together. You find them clustered in what's now South Berwick and Elliott, and then on the other side of the river and stuff. And so they really tended to glom onto each other, and then they melted into the body fabric of America and became part of America. And within a few generations, I live in a house of a descendant of John Gray, and he was a Civil War soldier, and he was a town official, and within a few generations, they were running the place down here, of course.
Well, that takes me to a question I had, which is they did find wives, many of them, and they did have families. Being isolated from the Puritan population and such, I wondered whether many of them did marry or perhaps die bachelors.
No, most of them married. That's why I found Brown and Orr were unusual, and I've heard some old historians back in the 19th century historians sort of bending over backwards trying to excuse why the fact these guys weren't married, that
Okay,
it's hard to find a wife, but that really wasn't the case.
I see.
I mean, you had people like Henry Sayward had sawmills, and he was up in off the map is Kennebunk,
Okay,
and he was virtually the only white family in Kennebunk. There were natives he got along pretty well with nearby before the native wars kicked off, but he had a wife and he had children, and all these guys found wives,
Huh.
virtually. And some of them may have been Irish immigrants or other
okay,
immigrants. Pretty much all of them ended up married. And now they've spread all over the country. I mean, their descendants come here I meet descendants from California, from, Florida,
yeah.
from all over the country coming to track down where their original ancestors came from. So,
I know. I think I mentioned to you, John Bean of Exeter, as he is called, is one of he's the progenitor of many, many beans in the United States today, perhaps Canada, for all I know.
yeah.
In the world, I'm sure some of them have left the country since they were born here, but perhaps he's had so many. But Alan Bean, the astronaut, is one of his descendants, and
I didn't know that. Wow.
yep.
But like Oliver Wendell Holmes, too, is descendant of Thomas Holmes, who was
Okay.
in Southborough, too. So, yeah, very prominent people.
Yeah, I think we're going to probably run out of time in a few minutes here, John. This has been a
Yes.
lot of great information in a short amount of time. I wasn't sure how we do, and we did fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on the Touchshot channel.
Oh, I love this, and I'm looking forward. If people want to come, I'm going to get out to the Highland Games, as many as I can in Massachusetts, New Hampshire. I may even get up to Montreal.
Okay.
I'll have my maps, and I've got hundreds of documents that I've put together on these lives of folks, and I can share information. I'm happy to share information with people. I'm trying to get to the point where I can sell this map.
Okay.
Proceeds to go to the museum, and I just have to make sure where I'm not violating any copyright laws and that kind of
Sure.
stuff.
So you're going to be at the festivals with a tent that says Old Berwick Historical Society, correct?
Yes, and Scots POWs, prisoners
All right.
of war in New England, and going to be doing workshops so far at where I'll have a PowerPoint presentation at the first one, Salem, New Hampshire.
Okay. Yes.
Game, and then Queechee, and then I've been asked by the Maine Highland Games to do something, and I'm trying to get into the Loon Mountain too. So
Okay.
I'll be there at all those, but try to hold the workshops at those. So.
Right. So the first one, everyone, that John just mentioned, is April the 20th at Salem High School. It's an indoor Scottish music and dance competitions and other things, and there's going to be some Scottish culture there as well, some clans, organizations, and John's going to be there with the Old Berwick Historical Society and Scots POWs to New England presentation.
Great. Well, thank you for this opportunity. So,
and I'll see you at many of those, John. I appreciate you doing this.
Oh, and just one last piece, if you get a second.
Certainly.
When I started this, I thought I was half Irish and half Greek. And then I did my DNA a couple of years ago, and it turns out I'm 40% Scottish, which is so funny.
Okay.
So I found my tribe too. So
there you go. That helps.
Yeah. Thank you, Ray. Though. Appreciate it.
All right, John. Have a good day. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Touchshot, everyone. Hello, everyone. If you enjoyed this program on the Touchshot channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And let us know what kind of topics you'd like to see in the future. Thank you.